Marriage can be very hard, and it is very likely that you have struggled at some point with conflict with your spouse. In fact, the type of conflict you've had with your spouse is very likely the most difficult or the worst you've ever had in your life with any other relationship. And there's good reason for that. It doesn't mean that's necessarily something wrong with you or your spouse. What that is the vulnerability of marriage. When you get married, you hold your heart out to someone unlike anyone else you've ever done so in your life. And there's some of the highest highs that can come with that, but there's also some of the lowest lows. And so if you've struggled with conflict, you're in good company. There's conflict in every marriage. And in fact, marriage requires conflict. You need conflict, but it needs to be healthy conflict. It can often turn into very toxic or unhealthy conflict. It can bring you to low places that you never imagined. It can cause you to think about divorce. It can cause you to think that that person is the enemy. Because what conflict does is it causes you to lose perspective. So we want to give you today a way to regain perspective on yourself, on your spouse, on your marriage, so you can navigate conflict better and have a better marriage.
So the tool we want to equip you with today to help navigate conflict is the idea of timeouts. We've heard all too often that in conflict, couples will just walk away, but they never actually come back and resolve the situation or discuss it further. They just carry on and act as if nothing actually happened. That's a very problematic habit, and we discourage people from doing it because it really just builds resentment, which then can give way to contempt. And you do not want contempt within your marriage. So that what we want to talk about today and how to execute it appropriately and effectively is this idea of timeouts when you're in the midst of a conflict.
So there are buttons inside you that your spouse can push in a way that no one else can push them. And when you get those buttons pushed, and it could be something as small as they walk into the room and they say something with a certain tone, and it just sets you on fire on the inside. And what happens is we turn to fight or flight, right? You either want to fight, you want to get angry or aggressive, or you want to shut down, you want to run away, you want to withdraw. Both of those are reactions. If you're in a reactionary state, you can't connect, you can't heal, you can't navigate conflict. So in order to process these things, and you need to, by the way, if you try to avoid this, it only makes it worse. You can take a conflict that can be resolved in 20 minutes, and it can extend over 2 weeks. It can go for a lifetime, some of these conflicts. So you need to get to a place where you're in a responsive state and not a reactionary state. And you do that through a timeout. Now, maybe you don't like the word timeout. You can call it a pause. What it is you need to be able to separate from each other for a set period of time to regain perspective and then come back together and process what just happened in a way where it can be resolved.
Right, so one of you needs to initiate the timeout, and you can say, like Nathan said, call it a timeout, call it a pause. You can give it a code word if you prefer, something that you both agree on. But the premise is you both say, or one of you at least initiates, and you both go your separate way. We even encourage you to set an actual timer on your phone so that you don't lose track of time. Set a timer, start at 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on how intense the conversation has been, and then come back together. If it hasn't been long enough, take an additional 10, 15 minutes. But what you do in that time apart is critical. It's really important that you don't take that time apart just to brew about what the other person did or said that made you so angry. That's not going to be a productive use of your time. It's not also going to give way to resolving the conflict. How you use that time apart, that time out, really either sets the tone for the resolution of the conflict or the continuance of the conflict.
So whoever calls the timeout, you can also suggest the amount of time it's going to be. And we get that it's not always possible to do this. You may be driving in the car. You may have children around. So maybe it's not 20 minutes. Maybe it's, hey, when the kids are in bed. Maybe it's when we arrive to this destination. Maybe if it's midnight and it's not good to have conflict late at night, you say, hey, let's talk about this at 7 o'clock in the morning. But the point of it is you have a set time that you come back because you will want to avoid it, and it always makes it worse when you do that. 3 things we want you to think about when you are in that space trying to regain perspective. The first question you want to ask yourself is, who is this person? Who is this person that I'm feeling these things toward? Remind yourself that they're the love of your life. They're your best friend. You have committed to a lifetime with them. In the moment, they feel like they're your enemy. They feel like they're more against you than for you. but remind yourself about the truth of what their heart is, even if it's hard to believe that in the moment. Second thing is ask yourself, what do I need right now? In our previous video, we talked about the issue's not the issue. Ask yourself, what is this really about? What do I need? You may find that you don't really need anything. You may find that you do need something, a decision, a validation, understanding. And the third is, what do you think they need? What are they needing? What are they feeling right now? Trying to practice that empathy for them. Okay, so who are they? Who is this person? What do I need? And what do they need? And that will help put you in a place where you can come back together and communicate those things. And again, in future videos, we'll talk about really how to effectively communicate, where you guys can have a real exchange of communication, be heard and hear. And we have found that when we have done timeouts in the past, maybe even up to 50% of the time, we would come back and the conflict would be resolved simply by taking that time out. In fact, sometimes we'd come back laughing. I know there was one time I came back laughing and Amy wasn't laughing, and I knew we needed another timeout, which is perfectly okay. As Amy said, you may have to call another timeout. I believe the record from a couple I had once, they called 11 timeouts in one evening. But if that's what it takes to resolve a conflict, 11 timeouts in one evening, which you probably want to take 11 timeouts, but 11 timeouts in one evening is far better than days or weeks, because you know how exhausting it is when you and your spouse are not doing well and you're still in conflict. It affects everything.
Everything. It really does. So the purpose of a timeout is not to avoid the conflict altogether, to pretend like nothing happened, to just carry on. The purpose is to regain perspective. Like Nathan said, it's regaining perspective on your spouse. It's regaining perspective on yourself. It's also gaining perspective on the situation. You really want to figure out, why are we even fighting? Sometimes we have conflict and we're really kind of saying the same thing. We're just highlighting different aspects of it, or maybe it sounds just a little bit different. So that time to have perspective makes all the difference in the world. I would also add to it, when you have that timeout, own your part. Even if it's only 10%, own your part 100%. Whatever contribution you've made toward the conflict, own it fully and apologize for that part. It really makes a difference. An additional thing that we would suggest is, when you return, if it's possible, some sort of physical connection can really help bring down the defenses and the walls. So holding hands, facing each other, it really is a powerful way to resolve the conflict quickly.
One of the best ways really to do that is we often encourage husbands, as the man, to go to your wife and just give her a hug. Doesn't have to be a long extended embrace, and as a wife, receive that hug. Now, you may not want to do that, you may not want to receive it, but that physical touch helps break down some of those barriers. Now, it may not be possible, but we encourage you to do that. Finally, the way you end a timeout is you come back together, you have the conversation, and you want to ask this question, if you can, at the end. Is this resolved between the two of us? It's okay if every conflict is not resolved in a single conversation, but if it's not, you need to have a time where you say, well, let's think about this for a couple of days, let's come back. And again, set aside a time that you actually are intentional about coming back, because if it's not resolved, if you do not come back to it until it's resolved, it will come up again and it will continue to build. It's sweeping things under the rug, as they say. So we encourage you to ask that question, is this resolved between the two of us?
And if you have to take an extended timeout or break, like Nathan mentioned, midnight's not a great time to try to resolve a conflict, and it's probably better in the morning. If you need an extended period of time and you cannot immediately come back to it, before you decide to take that break and end the conversation, give a reassurance of commitment. Hey, I'm committed to you, and I'm committed to us resolving this. I know we can't right now, but we're going to take the time and the space we need, gain perspective, but we're in this together, and we will work until it is resolved.
Honestly, this is, in our opinion, the only way to effectively manage conflict, especially if you've had extended negative conflict. You can get to a point after years of practicing this, right, where you may not have to take timeouts at all anymore. You're able to, in the moment, regain perspective. That takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. So don't feel like a failure if you're struggling with this or you're having to do it a lot. That's very normal. Conflict in marriage is normal. And if you practice this, this is highly effective. We also understand it can feel intimidating. It sounds hard. It may sound difficult. You'll be surprised, though, that when you do this, Negative conflict is far more difficult, right? It's far more exhausting. So we encourage you to try this, but you can't really spring this on your spouse. It's probably best for both of you to try to watch this video or at least talk about it together. Have a bit of a game plan when you're not in a negative space so that when that time comes, you know in your own way of communicating, because it may be like Amy said, a code word, like you may say chair, and that may be your timeout. But you have a plan so that when that happens, you give yourselves the best chance, set yourselves up for success. So we encourage you to try in this next week, calling a timeout, regaining perspective, coming back together, and start that journey of resolving conflict and building better connection in your marriage.